Hello. Vice President Technical R&D. Good afternoon, sir. We will wait for three more minutes, sir, and then we'll begin.
Sure, that's fine. Thanks.
Sindhu ma'am, ഒരു 3 minutes കൂടി വെയിറ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് നമുക്ക് സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്യാം.
Okay, sure.
A very good afternoon, one and all. As a part of the 113th birth anniversary of our founder, Sri P.V. Rama Varier, today we have our special webinar session by Dr. Harilal Madhavan. I request Dr. Sindhu, Vice President Technical of the Ayurveda Pharmacy Coimbatore Limited, to welcome the gathering and also to introduce the speaker. Ma'am, please.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this August occasion of 113th birth anniversary of our beloved founder, Arya Vaidyan Sri P.V. Rama Varier. Before introducing the speaker and before going to subject, I would like to tell a few words about our founder. The Dawn of Ayurveda, Sri P.V. Rama Varier, hailed from Sri Krishnapuram village in Palakkad. He was the son of a reputed Vaidya, Kunjan Varier, and Putti Varesiyar. He learned Ayurveda as per the ancient Gurukula tradition from Arya Vaidyan P.S. Varier, the founder and former managing trustee of Cortical Ayurveda Shala. He was a beloved disciple of Sri P.S. Varier, who trained him not only in treatment, but also in the preparation of medicines. He was given independent, soon after his education, he was given independent charge of the Cortical Ayurveda Shala clinic in Calicut, and he became a trustee of Cortical Ayurveda Shala quite early in life. His immense knowledge in Ayurveda, untiring efforts, humility, and devotion to the profession made him a very renowned physician par excellence and a man to be reckoned with in various spheres of public activity. In 1943, he left Cortical Ayurveda Shala. He came to Coimbatore and created a space of his own in Coimbatore. He started a clinic in Trichy Road, where he initiated his clinical practices. And it was at that time he realized that the requirement of quality medicines is a basic necessity for successful treatment. And possibly that could be the trigger for the starting of manufacturing unit in Kanchikode, Kerala. And Ayurveda Pharmacy Coimbatore was formed as a limited company in the year 1948, with its activities spread across treatment, manufacturing of medicines and education. As early as 1940, Sri P.V. Rama Varier had the vision of globalizing Ayurveda, and he took many major steps to do it. His successors, who spearheaded the institution after that, late Sri P.V. Chandrasekhara Varier and late Padma Sri P.R. Krishna Kumar, also followed his path of giving newer dimensions to AVP and making it more visible in the global scenario. So with this backdrop, I feel today's session by Dr. Harilal Madhavan on resurgence response and transformation of Ayurveda is a very relevant one. We are passing by a very unfortunate phase amidst the pandemic, but I would say Ayurveda has set its stage to show mankind that it has the finest and effective methods of fighting the pandemic. We know that thousands of Ayurvedic practitioners across the country are managing the pandemic, the COVID-19 infections very successfully, preventing hospitalizations and reducing the mortality rates. Yes, the evolution of Ayurveda from the personalized medicine to the contemporary form is in fact a journey from home pharmacy to a more evolved form of pharma industry. Dr. Harilal Madhavan, we welcome you to this forum. And Dr. Harilal Madhavan is a very renowned economist. He is a faculty from IISER Thiruvananthapuram, and he has many publications in this area of traditional medicines. I welcome you to this forum, Dr. Harilal, and I welcome one and all to this interactive session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sindhu and others. I think it's a real privilege for me to be here because I think it's the first time that I'm going to address so many Ayurvedic doctors, because I've been usually talking from a social science perspective. And, I have been discussing various aspects of Ayurvedic medicine's commercialization, the intellectual property right issues, and things like that, quite vibrantly in trying to mainstream these kind of discussions in the general pharmaceutical discussions quite a long time. So I think this is actually something really privileged to be here on this, birth centenary, 113th anniversary of Dr. P.V. Varier. So I think, I think this is the right time that we need to really discuss about the role of Ayurveda in the international public health regime. I think we have been having quite a lot of discussions about this, and I also see that there is a lot of discussions regarding the clinical practices and also evidence-based medicines. After this talk in the clubhouse, and I think that's very interesting to see that AVP like foundations has been initiating this, and I've been following AVP for quite a long time because I'm quite familiar with some of the works of AVP. And we have, a lot of research-based, evidence-based research models have been created by AVP. So I'm really happy to be here on this. So I have been working for the last more than 10 years on Asian medicines, various aspects of Asian medicines. Basically, I have done a PhD thesis which looks at the emergence of Ayurvedic industry in Kerala, and also then went on to look at its linkages in terms of the medicinal plant sector, and also the contributions it makes into the tourism industry, purely from an economics perspective. You understand that. So I don't really get into a kind of lot of pharmacological discussions, but basically looking at from a point of view of what it contributes into the economic development or social development of the state. So in the process, that also gave me some interesting impetus to look into the other similarly placed systems of medicines. If you look at my work in the last few years, it has been concentrating on, along with Ayurveda, on Tibetan medicine and Mongolian medicine. I had an opportunity to be part of an international research community which looks at the emergence of or industrialization or commercialization of Tibetan medicines in various countries, which has a closely, we can say, a similar path of modernization or a similar path of industrialization. There are so much similarities with Ayurveda when you think about it, and also try to see some kind of comparison with what's happening in China in terms of Chinese medicines. So having read a large literature on development of industrial development, the changes in the industrial formulations, the changes in the innovation practices. I think this, I mean, as Ayurvedic doctors also should know about these kind of changes that is happening around them. So I think having some kind of discussions would be really interesting in this regard. So for me today, I'll try to share a PowerPoint. I mean, if it doesn't work, then I'll talk from, yeah. I think it works, yeah. I hope you're able to see this.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So my today I am trying to talk what I have earlier working on to see that how this Ayurveda has been moved from a system-based approach or a kind of system to something which is important for the market. Okay, so I think this talks about the early transformation in Ayurveda. So a bit of history regarding this. So I think some of the points which actually coming out from the historical discussions would be very pertinent to really look forward to future. Some of the social scientists I see the Dr. Madhulika Banerjee, who has been, working quite a long time in this area. And also Dr. Unnikrishna, he has been looking at from a public health perspective. And there are Dr. Harish Narendas. It's interesting to see that there is a larger body of literature that is emerging from a number of international researchers, not essentially based in India, but there is a huge number of researchers which has been concentrated in Europe. Is actually started looking into these kind of interesting facts that what is happening in Ayurveda over time, not only in terms of its contribution to public health, but also its contribution to the modern pharmaceutical sector. Okay. So here I'm trying to give you some of the initial elements of commercialization that I have been discussing in my earlier thesis. Okay. It's interesting to see how, is it a new phenomenon that there is a renewed interest in, largely the traditional medicines or indigenous medicines or herbal medicines that we call upon, So if you look at the social science literature, there is a clear demarcation where you are actually using the terms like indigenous medicine or traditional medicine or, herbal medicines. It has a clear connotations anyway. But we actually started talking about this more and more when there is an opportunity of globalization has come in, whether Ayurveda has an important role in that or not. So probably today I'm not really going into that discussion quite a lot, but I'm happy to discuss in the discussion session. Here I'm trying to confine only to a few early transformations. So why this interest that has been coming up now? I think it has to be seen at from a three levels. One is at the policy level, because 1978 the Health for All call has actually eventually led to think about what are the ways of extending the public health to the entire population, the coverage of population, how that could be extended. So the Health for All agenda of Alma-Ata of 1978 has actually talked about the various ways of bringing into various systems of medicine into the mainstream to provide public health facility to the people around the world, especially in the countries like Latin America and Africa and many of the Asian countries. This actually seems pertinent given the inefficiency or accessibility problems of modern medicine. Second thing, I think what is more important is something what we know as health transition. If you look at some of the data that we have in terms of the disability adjusted life years lost by different causes like communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases and injuries, you see that the role of non-communicable disease has been kind of increasing quite a lot. Okay, you see there's a complete change from a communicable to non-communicable diseases. We can actually have this discussion in the context of COVID anyway, but I think still this kind of lifestyle diseases and non-communicable diseases, that what kind of burden that creates on the countries, especially the less developed countries, are quite important. And in the global health discussion of WHO and United Nations, when they had been discussing about the various countries' experiences, these kind of policies impact, what is the ways in which we can actually deal with this kind of health transition, the move away from communicable to non-communicable diseases in terms of the burden that it creates to the population is very important. And you see that there is a huge transformation in this sector. You can see this here in the non-communicable diseases actually crossing the communicable diseases percentage, and it is almost like around 60%, while the other one has gone down to around 20% or 25%, right? So the deaths related to non-communicable diseases is quite a burden for most of the countries, including high income or upper income or lower income countries. And in this context, I think the role that indigenous medicine or like Ayurveda can, or traditional medicines like Ayurveda can play is very important, which actually importantly, we need to look at the customized options or, holistic treatments and what kind of systems can deal with the social cost and psychological cost, which usually happens because of this kind of transition, is something important, right? So I think at the policy level, because of how these kind of systems could be integrated into the primary health systems, because of its contribution and also because of the health transition, I think it's important. And second thing, which is very important, is at the market level. Now as we know, there is a going back to nature, that kind of attitude. We quite usually discuss about this. And if you look at the 1980s, we see that very few number of countries have a policy on traditional medicine, right? But if you look at now, there are more than 100 countries which have a proper policy on traditional medicine. I mean, when I was looking at the Mongolians, health policies, I could clearly see this. How many countries have been actually, especially the Asia Pacific countries, how many of them have been moving towards a much better policy in terms of traditional medicine, because they have realized that this is quite important. Okay. And also with the growth of technological innovations like pharmacogenetics and pharmacokinetics kind of aspects, the company is also trying to see what kind of possibility they have in terms of herbal medicines, right? The role of bioprospection, for example, how do they can usually use the queue of knowledge from these traditional knowledge to create new drugs, right? So this has been, I mean, we have a fantastic example of Jeevani, which Coimbatore IISER also has been involved. But around the world, there has been quite a movement for bioprospective drugs. I cannot say it's a movement, but actually there is a interesting possibility of looking for bioprospective drugs, because you see that the cost involved in the process of innovation is quite high when you actually go from a molecular level. But if you have a knowledge which is actually proving that it is working, then it is easy to start looking at that knowledge and start the laboratory practices on that, right? So role of bioprocessing is actually creating huge level of possibilities of market. A second thing I see is that more than around 50% of the pharmaceutical patents got really expired in the last decade. Okay, so the companies are actually on a race to really find new drugs, the possibilities of involving in new drugs. So they also see that the possibility is actually something like a natural knowledge which is available there. So in that sense, I think one of the huge market which has been created around the world is the herbal market. And we don't have a proper data on that. Some of the estimates of Exim Bank and Export-Import Bank and some other agencies like ADB has been showing that it's around 90 to 120 billion of US dollars. Okay. And second and third one, probably we also have to think about the interest that has been creating at the consumer level. Okay. That is a new age movement, that the back to nature that I was talking about earlier. The new age movement that is happening in some of the countries like Canada and the USA. Okay. So especially in the Western countries have created a lot of interest. Usually I always talk about, when I visited some of the Ayurvedic resorts in South Kerala, I say that, large number of Europeans present there than, the Keralites. I mean, that itself shows that the interest, and we know that around 40% of our medical tourism's income is actually coming from the Ayurvedic tourism, right? So this shows that there is a huge coming back to these kind of treatments. And also in terms of the, the high waiting period in the insurance and other kind of medical reasons also behind this, which increases demand for, the plant-based medicines. Okay. And what it means, there is a huge demand in terms of policy level, market level, and consumer level, also brings and talk about, that brings up more issues of regulations, right? And I think these are something new that we need to talk about. These are the new issues that we need to talk about. But I think by setting this as a context, I need to really go back to see that how this interest of commercialization is actually being started in Ayurveda, because when you juxtapose this trend with the pluralistic attitude or the medical pluralistic attitude of different countries, this gives us a lot of questions more than answers. Okay. So medical pluralism is something which is very important. This term, we have been discussing and debating quite a lot from 1970s, which characterizes a situation in the third world in which people were resorting to various options of healthcare outside the government healthcare system. And earlier medical pluralism, we used to define it like that, outside the government healthcare system, what are the pluralistic options that people pursue? But now, but by 1990s, medical pluralism, when it, whatever literature has been talking about medical pluralism in a different way, where we actually talking about the pluralistic provision of medical treatments by government itself, the various legitimized pluralistic systems by government itself, right? So there is a state-sponsored medical pluralism in that sense. Okay, state legitimized is now has actually become the reality in most of the governments around the world. Okay, but if you usually look at the the development of Ayurveda or any other indigenous system in that case, I think the interesting framework we have is the tradition modernity framework. Okay, I'm sure most of you are actually quite familiar with this kind of framework, but within the tradition modernity framework, we have some various notions of various as. I think there is a cross talking here. Can you switch off the microphone? I think it's coming from some of the audience. Yeah, so there is a tradition modernity frame in which the development or underdevelopment of traditional knowledge system is really rest upon the static conception of knowledge, where we say that the designated tradition is kind of remaining unchanged or kind of threatened, and also fights a kind of pitched battle against the modernity. Usually the concept of traditional modernity framework is something like that, right? Where you actually fight very difficult or struggling to really survive in that particular contest between tradition and modernity, where tradition is actually suffering. But there is another argument, is a mutual shaping argument, where usually you see that the tradition and modernity kind of remain as coexist in the system. Or, I mean, when you talk about coexisting, you also have to talk about the integrations. Okay, so there are different models of mutual shaping, whether it could be an integrative approach where you actually mutually subsume each other, you try to get the properties from each other and try to grow together, right? And there is a coexisting argument where both of the system coexist. Okay, so if you look at Ayurveda's case in India, you see that there's a coexisting argument, right? Ayurveda coexists along with many other systems, the other systems in Ayush, Unani, Siddha and all, and also along with the biomedicine, right? And in China, if you see that this is not a coexisting situation, it's actually an integrative situation, right? So you also see that the traditional modernity frame has a coexisting argument as well as a mutual shaping argument, as well as a kind of struggling of tradition argument. But I think what is important is a mutual shaping argument, where even in a mutual shaping situation, you see that there is a power involvement. The involvement of I should say the hierarchical nature of or the structure of the systems. You see that there is a hierarchy within the systems, right? Within different systems. You see that Ayurveda at the top, Siddha. So that there could be a possibility of hierarchy which could be created, and this power involvement is also creates a lot of trouble for the existence of the systems. Like biomedicine is at the top of the hierarchy, right? So within this framework of medical pluralism, the relation between medicine, state, and society varies considerably. I mean, that's a point where you see that there is a various stakeholders in the system. When you talk about the medical community, the state, and the society, this relation, changes considerably. There is a temporal nature of this change. Okay. For example, the systems like naturopathy, chiropractic, and osteopathy in places like Europe and North America, they struggle a lot. They struggled a lot to really recognize in the system. And some kind of struggle that Ayurveda also has faced over a period of time, right? So from here, I think it's very important to look at the the colonial and post-colonial confrontations that Ayurveda has been facing in India, or faced in India. I think it's a very complex Orientalist process that we have seen, that Ayurveda, how Ayurveda has developed, or how that has been actually dealt with or managed or confronted with scientific medicine and other indigenous medicine, whether they were opponents or any other possibility of existence was there. So was there an attempt to really develop it as a distinct Indian science? So what are the scientific knowledge traits that has been showed over time? So looking at these kind of aspects, it's very interesting to see that there is a core periphery relation in indigenous medicine. What I meant to say is that there are some kind of a framework that we can think about, like Basala, a person who has actually talked about the core periphery analysis, where you see that over time, the modernization has a particular method where the traditional, when the traditional system comes in confrontation with modern system, they slowly started absorbing the modern system's characteristics, right? So this course characteristics will be slowly absorbed by the peripheral through the peripheral relations, and many of those relations or this temporal kind of exchanges between core and periphery can create these kind of changes in different systems. I mean, for example, if you look at the Indian system, where you see that it has very close link with the philosophical schools of India, and you see the Lokayata school, for example. But you see that in confrontation with biomedicine, Ayurveda actually tried to keep a stable scientific taxonomy always. When Basel argues that when there is a confrontation between the scientific modern medicine and the traditional system, there will be a complete and kind of subsume of or submission of this traditional medicine into the modern system. That has not really happened in the case of Ayurveda. There is always an existence of a stable taxonomy, a stable scientific taxonomy. And second thing that Ayurveda had faced is the magical religious influences and the caste hierarchy. There are caste hierarchy is one of the important things. I mean, you see that there are large number of references that in Kerala, the caste system has created a lot of issues within the development of medicines. At the same time, you see that there are large number of caste in Kerala has been involved in exchanging this traditional medicines, exchanging in knowledges. For example, you see that in the writings of Richard Grove, there has been talks about how each then has been contributing to the larger knowledge of Hortus Malabaricus that one tree has been actually developed as a project, right? So as an Ijava Vaidya, he has been, that particular community has been contributed quite a lot. At the same time, if you look at the codification or textual traditions, the most of the codification happened in the Brahmanical traditions, okay? So there is a kind of caste hierarchy which existed there, but I think in Kerala, some way this has been actually worked quite well, where large number of caste knowledge or the knowledge in among different castes have been kind of streamlined at a later stage. Okay, but decoupling from a magico, the tantric religious influences were quite a big task. Probably by the Buddhist involvement, I think some part of the magical religious influence has been taken away. And apart from talking about the scientific development in the later stage, okay. And the traditional taxonomy, I'm talking about why the traditional scientific taxonomy is still existing. I mean, if you see that Ashtanga Hridayam has been continuously referred as a, as a source text in most of the Ayurvedic medical products that you see nowadays. So that kind of taxonomy has been kind of remained intact. And also you see that the colonial biological explorations during the earlier times created a lot of trouble for existence of these kind of knowledge systems. I mean, you see the Vasco da Gama's entry in the 1498 has actually started looking into the possibilities of biological trade, the plants trade. And there is also a reference on Garcia Diota's entry into the Goa region. There has been the books which talks about the floras of South India. So this was, we need to really think about whether this was a more of a medical exploration or was a botanical exploration. Probably this was used as a botanical exploration at a later point, because that actually have given quite a lot of a profit. I should not say profit, but quite a lot of benefits to the colonial rulers to really bring these drugs back into the Indian subcontinent by exporting the raw materials from the Indian subcontinent. Okay, they have actually changed these raw materials and then brought back into the Indian subcontinent, right? So I mean, early efforts to introduce allopathy in India was, allopathy in India was actually happened in the 20th century, around 19th century, end of the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, where you see that a lot of, much before that, there is a lot of drug substitution which has happened during this time. Okay, so the colonial government actually tried to see that the value of traditional floras and the medical systems, and you see that officially allowing the local production of indigenous drugs instead of the costly import of the allopathic drugs during the colonial time. Deepak Kumar has been talking about these kind of discussions of earlier, drug substitution possibilities in the 2001, his 2001 article. And he has actually written an extensive book about the various aspects of early drug trade in the Indian subcontinent. Okay, but even though they have attempted this drug standardization in the late 19th century, the Central Indigenous Drugs Committee of the colonial government has rejected the idea or opposed the proposal of drug substitution, saying that the Indian raw materials were quite impure or adulterated. Okay, and they actually rejected the idea of drug substitution at a later point, even though they have done quite a lot of substitution at the earlier point. Okay, but they found that they cannot simply reject it altogether. So they have made a list of around 40 medicines which grew abundantly in India, which would be very cost-effective and perfect substitutes for most of the allopathic drugs they wanted to bring back to India. Okay, and the value that they have given to the indigenous drugs, they understood during the First World War time, because there is a dearth of medicines, and they have actually started looking at the possibilities of using this, using these medicines quite vibrantly at that time. But even before that, if you look at the Bengal Pharmacopoeia of 1842 or Indian Pharmacopoeia of 1868, that literally contained the substitutes for almost every drug that contained in the British Pharmacopoeia. So they actually understood the richness of this pharmacopoeia that existed at that time. Right? So most of the herbal products imported at that time to India, you can see that mostly produced by the raw materials which has been created here. Okay, so this led to overall, we can say the colonial time has actually quite difficult in terms of its confrontation with biomedicine, but this led to some kind of documentation and systematization of knowledge or indigenous medical knowledge at that particular time. Secondly, the early interest of Europe's interest, we understood that it is actually more botanical than the medical, So they have actually seen some kind of commercial benefits in terms of understanding the flora and fauna at that time. So, so there were more, explorations into the botanical knowledge and possibilities of commercialization at that time. Okay. So apart from other changes, but generally you see that colonialism was quite very difficult per se for the indigenous medicines, because it created a situation in which the state is subscribed to one official system of medicine, which is biomedicine. And also in the linear narrative of this, which, the state has created a temporal sequence of event that relegated Ayurveda into the realm of tradition. And that you see that in terms of native medical institutions in the 1835, abolition of native medical institutions, like later point saying that this will not work effectively because it creates a kind of hybrid of people who have hybrid knowledge of biomedicine and Ayurvedic knowledge or Sanskrit knowledge, which may not be quite useful. That kind of argument has been seen during the native medical institutions time. I think the second relevant point is the professionalization point. How professionalization is very important in bringing up a kind of commercial aspects into the system. Okay, this transformation necessitated grounding of Ayurveda in a new theoretical setting, as well as a new set of institutional functionaries. What kind of institutional functionaries was required for a proper commercialization was actually a kind of capacity building process. How do you actually start training or at a larger level? Okay, and professionalization or training and integration of Ayurvedic medicine, education, we can say that it actually started as a pressure strategy, where the professionalization of training was used as a mechanism for bringing uniform standards as a tool of organizing the practitioners, which will be able to apply political pressure on state and central governments to influence the policies relating to Ayurveda and to efficiently defend the entrenched and hostile forces of modern medicine. So there was a proper purpose for starting a training or the role of training or capacity building at that particular point of time. And you see that in the north of India, rulers of Muslim state employed several hakims, the Unani physicians at that time, and several Vaidyas, Ayurvedic physicians that were provided special grants. Okay. And in the feudal mode of the medieval economy, the feudal intermediaries like Mansabdars especially had their own private physicians. They have employed, once at a point of some data shows that the number of, the Vaidyas employed by these Mansabdars was actually much more than the, otherwise trained Ayurvedic doctors. Okay. So in the feudal mode of medieval economy, you see that Mansabdars' roles in incorporating, Hakims and Vaidyas into the mainstream health practice was quite important one. So it has been noted that some of them acquired huge wealth and even rose to the position of nobles at that time during the feudal times. So, this is a small fraction of the entire community, but at the same time, you see that they are actually been producing, they have actually been able to create quite a lot of wealth by this, integration strategy of the Mansabdars at that time. And 1822 onwards, efforts of integration has been advised and tried in Kolkata region and in some of the Mumbai and Madras presidencies. But you see that in 1835, the British government has rejected this idea of, integrating Sanskrit teachings and biomedical teaching in the native medical institutions, and they have dismantled it. And probably this had some kind of adverse impacts on the development of Ayurveda and other systems of medicine at that time. And obviously, this has actually been, encouraged by the protests that actually came from the purists, the Shuddha Ayurvedists, who actually found inefficiency of the physicians in both the system. The system here, the system means the biomedicine and the Ayurveda. The people who came out, the trained people who came out from these native medical institutions, they found that they're not quite useful to the system. Okay. But the Patashala and the production process was quite an interesting kind of event. If you actually look at the Kerala's case, you know, the Thiruvananthapuram Ayurveda Patashala, which was actually came up in the 1880, in the late 1880s, was the first step towards the institutionalization of training. You know, so at least in Kerala, unlike other places of institutionalization of production, in its broad sense, started with the institutionalization of training. I will say why I'm talking about this is actually an indication of institutionalization of production in a short while. Okay, what it actually means that, you know, there were successful students who actually came out from Travancore Padashala. They appointed in various parts of the states, and the state-sponsored grants in aid has given to them. If you, I mean, I can share the writings of mine in the working paper, which I have written extensively about, you know, the institutionalization of Ayurvedic education at that particular time, which gives us a lot of important aspects, how the early institutionalization has started in Thiruvananthapuram region. Okay, and obviously, this is actually something was, you know, initiated from the state. I know Parameshwaran Murtad, Sri Parameshwaran Murtad was actually appointed as a committee head, and he has actually looked at the possibility of collating or bringing together all these Vaidyas which existed, I mean, was at that time in the South region, and they have been given some kind of grants in aid, and they have been actually advised to start, you know, some kind of production centers at various parts of the state. Okay, so this grants in aid is given with the view to promote and provide incentives to Ayurvedic practice and to bring the private practices under control. So this is actually over the private practices, or, you know, some kind of fake practices. This can actually give a kind of momentum for an institutionalized training process. So while the intention of raising the Padashala as a well-known Vaidyashala had been noted, to begin within a taluk, all taluk boundaries, and qualified men were allowed to start the Vaidyashalas. Okay, this is the point. So there is a large number of Vaidyashalas has been started in the Travancore region at that particular time. So this could be considered as the initiator for an official production of medicines, and was solely led by a healthcare concerns of the state, because state were actually worried about a lot of public health issues. Now, there were a lot of communicable diseases, infectious diseases at that time. So they wanted that, you know, there should be proper, you know, enough medical forces to deal with this particular problem. And they understood that only the available indigenous Vaidyas or Ayurvedic physicians could deal with it. Okay, so the medicine required by the Vaidyashalas were provided on the request of concerned Vaidyas. So the amount of grants allotted to the Vaidyas were based on the qualification of the medical staff, the area and the number of persons served, the nature and amount of equipments by way of medicines, surgical instruments, etc., and the nature and extent of building accommodation. Okay. So there were various criteria of which how effectively this works. So depend on that, they actually provided the grants in aid. So all physicians who received grant in aid were liable to keep an account of disease wise of the number of patients and amount of return and expenditure, etc. I mean, this is very interesting. I mean, there is a you know, kind of proper data keeping system was initiated to, and this actually, I mean, when you go into the archives to look at what kind of infectious diseases was prevalent at that time, the epidemiological understanding of that particular time, these kind of data is quite useful. Okay, and this was initiated very interestingly during the 1890s and early 1900s. So they, so if they actually lack anything, they should report back the necessary medicine, and they were liable to inspections at any time from the state. So it's a totally a kind of state controlled system, which was initiated in the southern region. The medical staff of these grant and aid institutions was expected to hold a certificate of having passed the final examination in the Ashtanga Hridaya Medical School. Okay, and state funds, I mean, I don't remember, I think that around 35 rupees or something like that at that time, state funds were allotted to the building of Vaidyashalas and they were provided with adequate supply of medicine. So these entire, supply of medicines, the training of the physicians, and how they keep the data, all has been monitored by the state over a period of time. And in contrast, what happened in the Malabar region is the state support was seriously lacking in the Malabar district. It was not a princely state, right? It was under the colonial rule, so which is part of the Madras presidency. So the initiative came from prominent Ayurvedic practitioner P.S. Varier, who pointed out precisely this lack before the Muhammad Usman Committee, demanding greater standardization of training. So he actually requested for a greater standardization of training. The curriculum which he put together initially was an integrated one, both biomedicine and the Sanskrit knowledge, with both allopathic and Ayurvedic components. Later, the curriculum shifted towards exclusive instructions in Ayurveda. I mean, most of you must be knowing about this. Varier actually took the initiative for bringing together experienced practitioners of Ayurveda in the training center, especially in the North Kerala side, which was quite an amazing effort. So according to him, which the government was not ready to undertake any of these kind of initiatives, So because of the lack of availability of experts and resources, the government was actually not able to really take up any kind of public health interventions, In his words, it's like there are very few knowledgeable and experienced Vaidyas in Kerala today at that particular time. Even if there are some, they have no facilities to train and teach disciples. There is enough reason to believe that after one more generation, the condition of Ayurveda would become so critical that any effort to remedy the situation is likely to be futile. Okay. The general opinion, therefore, is that the arrangements for imparting training should be made as early as possible. This kind of proposal that he has actually put forward, and the government was not really, even though government has actually supported meagerly, but not the entire idea of bringing that into practice, executing this idea was actually taken up by him. He integrated the training and medicine profession expertise. This is very important. He thought that the collectors employed by the physicians are largely ignorant about the right qualities, the types, and the preservation of plants. And this is probably one of the main reasons why some of the Ayurvedic medicines or treatments fails. So this need to be properly addressed. The Kotak Ayurveda Padashala was, because of that reason, he actually integrated the production expertise and the education system. This is a kind of very unique model that we could see there. The Kotak Ayurveda Padashala was conceived as a solution to these perceived lacunae in production and training, and it hoped to solve them through standardizing these procedures, right? So he wanted to impart a kind of a very interesting, very standardized mechanisms of training and also the production techniques to the students. The students were trained in manufacturing drugs as well. Experience in manufacturing was made part of the training. The government recognized the Padashala students as registered Ayurvedic practitioners. So in this sense, I'm not going into the details of it, but if you read the article, you will get to know more details. So unlike in Bengal, you see that Ayurveda in Kerala. So unlike in Bengal, Ayurveda in Kerala did not suffer a demotion to a source of knowledge merely of substitutes for allopathic drugs, but it, however, underwent a process of modernization, though it has not subsumed to the or demoted to the kind of phase demotion during the colonial struggle. But there's a quite number of modernization process that happened is the codification or professionalization. Okay, so the modernization process, however, were clearly different. In Travancore, the state's effort appeared to have been crucial. You see the southern part, Travancore part, the state's effort appeared to have been crucial, while in Malabar, the initiative of enterprising individuals like Varier were prominent, right? So these collective and individual efforts unfolded in the backdrop of a larger shift towards acceptance of modern science, some way of incorporating a modern curriculum and universal standard for assessing the knowledge claims. Okay, so now I think along with this, training modernization or training professionalization, what we can see is that the changes in the production relations. Okay, I think this is very relevant, where I see that the evolution of Indian industries in the 18th, 19th centuries, can be analyzed in the similar framework. I think Ayurveda also can fit into the same framework in some way. From available sources, it appears that in the cases of production of Ayurvedic drugs, the major shifts have been from a kind of very home-based production system to a kind of petty commodity production, which I call a kind of, the nature of cottage industries. I'll talk about it in detail. And then to a kind of large-scale manufacturing of drugs. So you see that there are three, production shifts that you can see in the 19th century, the late 19th and early 20th century, and in the early 20th century. Okay. The first one is actually in the 19th century. The medicine is something considered as something like a no price good, where basically the structure of production process. The production relations is quite important in the Marxian term, because production relations will try to make you understand the various relations that existed during that particular time of history between the various stakeholders of that system. Especially if you think about, community, Ayurvedic community, between the education system, between the manufacturing of drugs, between the state and the society. So these various stakeholders, how they have behaved in a particular time could be analyzed by the mode of production analysis. Okay. So in Ayurveda, if you consider the first stage, I should say, I think there's a medicine as a no price good, and which means that there is a familial mode of production. In the first half of the 19th century to even early 20th century, we come across a large number of Ayurvedic familial production system and distribution transactions without any specific demand for the money for drugs that they sell. Okay. For example, in South India, there were a large number of small dispensaries, which actually established by Ashtavaidyas, for example, at different parts of the state, where treatment was provided free of cost, because the belief that receiving remuneration for Ayurvedic treatment would nullify the effect of the medicine. This is quite a very familiar argument. And at that time, Ayurveda was considered as a service, not to be remunerated, though the production of medicine was concentrated in the physician's residence or family. Okay, I think that's relevant. That means that the service and production were not clearly alienated. That's a point here. You see that there is close connection between the service and production, and the production here is actually considered as a way in which you are actually giving this, these drugs to the people with a free of cost. So it's basically the production was actually a service. Okay. And in most of the cases, physician's family served as a unit of production of medicine, right? Since the knowledge remained within the physician, the collection of raw materials, the production of necessary ingredients, all done by the physician himself or his family himself. The treatment did not seem to have brought direct remuneration in any case. This does imply that Ayurvedic medicines were never considered as a commodity to be exchanged for money or for any other commodities, even though the barter system was existing at that time. And this is true for most of the Ayurvedic production or family production at that time. But in some, castes, in some of the sections, this is actually a livelihood issue. They found that there should be some kind of remuneration which actually covers the cost of production, because this is actually a matter of livelihood issues for some of the people, right? While some of the sections of the society are able to manage with its no price commodity kind of service kind of oriented production process, Some sections are not really able to do this because they should at least get the cost of what they produce, right? So that is also visible in some of the lower strata in the caste hierarchy. Okay, so the details will be available in the particular write-up, which I can send it to you later. Okay. The then existing mode of Ayurvedic treatment and the preparation of medicine were suitable for a traditional village economy in some sense. And it's a kind of direct connection between the physician and the patient. So the dosage of medicine was determined in accordance with the nature and intensity of the disease, the requirement of individual cases, and the demand for specific situations. You understood how Ayurveda has been working and you're quite familiar with it, right? So in this mode of treatment, it was literally impossible to produce and keep all the medicines prepared in advance, right? So a kind of idea of a mass production or idea of a huge production has been completely rejected. So in this kind of treatment, you see that it's really difficult to produce in advance and keep it, right? And most of the time you see that the shelf life of the products, the medicines are quite short because it's mostly decoctions and all. And usually the patients themselves prepare the medicines with the advice of this, doctors. So you see that, this kind of mode of production is, this has been documented by Nagamaya in most of the archival documents, where you see that there's a huge demand for these kind of medicines because it is very efficient as well as it is free of cost. And this actually led to wide coverage of traditional medicine, which is easily accessible for people, especially in Kerala. Okay, so these factors helped in creating a huge regional demand for Ayurvedic medicines in that particular time, especially in the 19th century. So the localization of goods and services, just like what happens in the agrarian economy, in the case, if you think about medical community, Ayurveda has actually been kind of started production, but in a very familial mode, production only within the family. But it started slowly progressing because it's a huge demand that is created because of its nature of a service-oriented production process. As against this, if you look at the Bengal manufacturers, they initiated an early global marketing efforts when their counterparts in South remained passive, right? So if you really compare this kind of situation with Bengal, you see that the increase in demand for Ayurvedic medicine was mainly, kind of gone really high because of the reasons like, large number of districts has been dealing with Ayurvedic medicines, and it's a huge cost in the Western medicine and growing populations. Because of all these, the demand for Ayurvedic medicines in the north, especially in the Bengal region and in the south, has been kind of growing. Okay, and also one important reason why the demand has been growing is the huge existence, the large existence of the infectious disease at that time. Okay, so even you can see that most of the public health system has been worked in the framework of biomedicine. There is a huge demand for Ayurvedic medicine at the other level, where it could effectively handle the infectious diseases, right? So and also for the Britishers, is actually they found that it is quite costly for bringing in British physicians to the state, and also provide the treatments during the colonial government time. So they also promoted some kind of, especially Hakims and Vaidyas has been started promoted at that time. Okay, and the teaching and practice of medicine was confined primarily to the families of Vaidyas and Hakims from generation to generation. If you look at the Bengal's case, especially, I'm talking about Unani and Ayurveda here, because the process of modernization was kind of similar in the case of Ayurveda and Unani. You see that the production process also have been started almost at the same time, while Varier has actually been initiated in Kerala. Hakim Ajmal Khan has actually initiated this in the northern India, where the firm known as Hamdard has actually started slow productions at that particular time, right? So as I said, the chemical side of the pharmacy was largely ignored even at this particular point of time. There were references to show that Ayurvedic physicians acquired great honor in both South India and North India and received considerable help from the regional governments. So in the mid 19th century, in Travancore, at least one Vaidya was given a granting aid from the Raja. Less frequently, the Vaidya was provided with other facilities such as the arrangements of buildings and supply of medicines, etc. Okay, and this slowly led to a kind of need for an organized production, and this led to a kind of movement towards a proto-industrial production. That I'm talking about the second one, where the more organized or more move towards a proto-industrial kind of production system has been started. Okay, and it is actually started because of two things. One is it occurred. One is an external factor because of this growth was spurred by the organized drug industry development in Britain, and they have kind of slowly started dominating in the Indian market. They actually started bringing in these kind of industrial production drugs, industrially produced drugs into the Indian market. So that created a kind of tensions among the indigenous medicines that they are actually losing in competition. And second one is an internal factor. There is a wide acceptance of the institutionally trained Ayurvedic physicians at that particular time. Okay. So there are three main processes that turned drug market into an organized industry in Britain because of the standardization of drugs, the advances in the field of bacteriology and pharmacology. The third was the development of improved techniques of industrial manufacturing. So these kind of practices slowly started moving into, or started, given a competition to the indigenous drugs manufacturing. And the highly skilled and efficient Vaidyas and availability of cheap labor in Ayurveda has actually created some kind of bottleneck. And this created a kind of low-level equilibrium trap for the Ayurveda to progress. Okay, so they understood that some kind of these external factors and internal factor of more livelihood aspects that created a struggle for the physicians in Kerala and many other states also, especially for the self-trained physicians in the southern part, they slowly turned into start manufacturing things in the cottage production system, right? They have slowly moved away from a familial production to kind of extending it to a kind of cottage production system, right? So in terms of technological progress, it's nothing much, but it's a kind of manual increase in the production process. Okay. So the two factors, the external pressure to catch with the modern medicine and the internal pressure to really find a livelihood for the traditionally trained physicians, coupled with technological stagnation, forced the physician to start small-scale manufacturing of indigenous medicine to a larger extent. So by the end of 19th century, you see that two different groups emerged among the practitioners of Ayurveda, those who rendered medical services and others who started manufacturing medicines. And also see that some of the physicians who actually been quite popular in different areas, they actually started buying medicines from these people who are actually started producing it, right? So in some part of North India, there was actually small medicine plant bazaars have started emerging. And so on the one hand, looming competition from the manufacturing allopathic drugs created the objective need to move into a more of a centralized kind of production. And even though earlier the production was actually been concentrating in a few areas, most of the small producers have started thinking about there need to be a more standardized kind of production. Though we need to think about more kind of investment. Okay, so in the early 20th century, or we can say the very late 19th century, there is actually thinking of a more capital investment in the production process of Ayurveda. Okay, I think the first hurdle they faced is the large-scale industry production of indigenous drugs was there any kind of incentive for such kind of a production? But what kind of risk involved in such kind of entrepreneurship is actually a problem. That's why most of the Marwadis who otherwise invested in many other businesses have not invested in this. Okay, because they were quite unknown about the risk involved in the production process of this. And second hurdle is actually the prevailing highly labor-intensive production structure, which created inadequate centralized large-scale production. For large-scale production, you need some kind of mechanization, right? So that is actually one of the other hurdles. The third one is actually, even though we had large number of human resources in terms of physicians, they are kind of scattered around, and which also involved large number of quacks. So identifying the quacks and the original physicians actually remind us about, okay, and but everybody really understood that there should be some kind of private initiative of production is really necessary in this process. How much time I have? Can I talk for another 5 minutes or 10 minutes?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Is it okay? Yeah.
5 to 10 minutes would be fine, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So in this, when I talk about the entry of capital in the early 20th century, what is relevant is what happened in the Bengal. In the late 19th century, a person called Ganga Prasad Sen has actually chose the path of popularizing Ayurvedic drugs as a better alternative to Western medicine. He sold medicines according to fixed prices and introduced consultation fees, published advertisement for drugs, and even exported them. Okay. He also published a journal called Ayurveda Sanjeevani, like we had the Dhanvantari in Kerala. The first Bengali journal was actually started by him in Ganga Prasad Sen in Kolkata. So this enterprise became so successful, and they started exporting medicines to Europe and America even at that time. Okay, so this is actually happened in the late 19th century, even before Dabur or Kottakkal has actually been initiated its production process, right? So he, in 1994, another Vaid, Ganga Prasad Ray, who was inspired by the setup, and he actually started building a large manufacturing unit in 1884 called N. Sen and Company. And the realized profit was evident from, evident that, how far this business could be successful, and in the first initial 2 years, the amount of income that they could generate through this production process was quite huge, and which was much more than the expected, any kind of expectations. So in short time, these Kavirajas who have started production, including another one who is Chandra Kishore Sen, who has actually become the richest. He became the richest man in India, right? So 1898, he shifted the dispensary to another place and then started a huge production, somewhat away from the Kolkata, and he started the production. Thus, by 1900, the demand for Ayurvedic drugs have increased quite a lot, and which started occupying the huge share in the country's drug market. Okay, so by 1910, you see that there are a large number of Vaidyashalas like Shakti Aushadhalaya, Sadhana Aushadhalaya, Kalpataru Ayurvedic works, which is in Dhaka now. So large number of Ayurvedic production centers have started coming up in the northern part. So there are actually no initiative to undertake large-scale production in other side of the country, and unlike the big section of Bengali intelligentsia, which helped to set up the dispensary and Ayurvedic firms, the Muslim elite or clientele were not ready to help the Hakims financially, So, but only the Hakim Ajmal Khan, who has started production in the Unani, has become successful, and he was able to somehow invest by raising money from the regional money market and all. Okay, so in 1905, Hamdard came into the picture. So the initiative of production in the south for the market, especially production for the market, spread to South India with the initiation of Dr. P.S. Varier, obviously, starting Ayurvedic Shala at Kottakkal in 1902. So this not only had an economic relevance, but has an important step in the political renaissance of Ayurveda in South India. Okay, Dr. Varier realized that the indigenous medicine could contest the increasing influence of Western medicine only if it is developed in the similar infrastructure. Okay. And, if you read the writings of Dr. Panikkar in 1992, he mentions that the advertisement published on the occasion of its establishment reflected various business acumen, ability for innovation, and his will to change according to the contemporary needs, right? And also you see that he had no hesitation following the Western example, discarding the old prejudices, and thus bringing into operation a system of manufacture of medicine on modern scientific lines and marketing on a commercial basis. So in the fourth year, 1905-6, the sales turnover for the Ayurvedic Shala has actually rose from 57,000 to around 1.7 lakhs rupees. Okay, so they see that there is a commercial viability in the production process has been visualized by this. So all this suggests that in the first decade of 20th century, capital really penetrated into the production of indigenous drugs on a commercial basis, surmounting the whatever bottlenecks that we have been talking about. Okay, and also with the small support of the regional governments like patronage of Travancore and Cochin Rajas and Samorin of Calicut, there's some kind of professional middle class support was actually been able to get in this kind of venture. But nowhere in India did the government take the initiative for setting up industrial production, except in two drugs, for example, I think morphine and quinine, right? I mean, it did not really risk going beyond these kind of particular ventures of morphine or quinine. But in 1905, the tentative beginnings of Unani drug manufacturing has been started. And what another bottleneck was kind of, inventions that required by the Ayurvedic mass production is actually the palatability and how the machines will be introduced into the system. So the earlier innovations in the mechanized sector came in the form of improved appearance, palatability, and better storing capacity for the existing drugs, and consequently finding newer markets, right? The traditional Ayurvedic Vaidyas were still strong in the regional areas, dispensing their own drugs. So when I talk about these various periodizations as a service entity, as an organized petty commodity production, or an entry of capital, this is not a linear kind of movement. Obviously, there is overlapping that, there are familiar production mode was still existing during the petty commodity production. And even during the large scale manufacturing, there was petty commodity production existed at a particular point of time. So if you try to really periodize this various phases of production, you can see that in Kerala until 1830s, it was most of a service dominated production process. And from 1830s to 1880s, you can see more of a petty commodity production, where you see that I think during that time, if I remember correctly, the ETM Aushadashala was actually came into started, dispensary was started. And there is also dispensaries which started Vishachigilsa at various points, right? So the domestic demand has been hugely created by this kind of, petty commodity production, which resulted in the entry of capital in the 20th century. So especially we can say that 1880s to 1920s, you see there is a shift from kind of service to industry in the case of Ayurveda. Okay, and now there are something like which talks about the shaping of the market of Ayurveda is. The initial bottlenecks was actually to bringing in the enterprising Ayurvedic practitioners. We have seen that some kind of some prominent figures like Dr. P.S. Varier and Ajmal Khan has actually circumvented this problem by their vision strategies. And second thing was they introduced various frugal innovations. It's like not technological innovations, but very small frugal innovations like palatability and starting various networks, was some of the earlier innovations. And another interesting thing is that when they introduced these drugs, they introduced these drugs, especially during the outbreak of infectious disease, for example. We have an example of Vishuchigari, a drug who was introduced when the cholera has actually broke out. Okay, and this has actually proved to be very efficient. So bringing indigenous drugs during the infectious time created trust among the people, which actually led them to buy more and more of these kind of medicines. So in a sense, you see that there is a huge change which happened in the Ayurvedic sector. One with the initiation of P.S. Varier, then Hakim Ajmal Khan, and also one important thing is that the money that has been raised for this large-scale production was mainly organized from the small kuris and chittis, that small money market that existed in some parts of the country. So I mean, I'm not talking about the AVS case, but there are some kind of production process have been started with the help of small investment which raised from the money market. Okay. So also then you see that 1900, Dabur, who has started as a biodrug production process, has slowly turned into Ayurvedic production. And they have brought in the first drug, Pudinhara, as a patent. That's the first patented drug in the market, Ayurvedic market, that is Pudinhara. And also there is another product called Ring Ring. It's an antifungal remedy. Some kind of these examples created or brought us the idea that how Ayurveda has slowly commercialized and mass manufactured. Okay. So I have not gone into the details, but I have just given you a very bird's eye view of how the initial production system has started. But I'm happy to talk about it in the discussion session to think about the problems of contemporary production and what are the issues that we face now. So generally, I should say that the codification professionalization mechanism has considered as a resurgence strategy, which helped Ayurveda to regain its kind of place in the public health system. I think somewhere we have to understand that a public health, mode of Ayurveda has been preceded by a kind of commercialized aspect of Ayurveda. Okay, so even though it has actually accepted the accoutrements of modern medicine and production, I mean, this is actually done at the right time. So integrating science firmly into the productive mechanisms helped Ayurveda to initially move into the market. And some of the frugal innovations and integrative strategies also helped in this regard. Okay. So I'll probably we can talk about some of the concerns while we discuss these aspects. I'm sorry I have taken a little more time. I think I stop here. Thank you.
So that was very interesting, in fact, to see how the whole process has brought the industry into shape. Though we have not gone into the contemporary part of it. Yes, that was interesting. I have many questions. Before I ask some questions, I request or I look forward for the questions from the other participants, and if someone from the HO can also coordinate the questions coming in YouTube and Facebook. Yes, that would be interesting. The program is live on Facebook and also in YouTube at the same time. I'm allowing to unmute others now.
Dr. Harilal.
Yes.
I have you were referring to the triad state, society, and medicine. From the perspective of social scientists, how do you perceive state, society, and traditional medicine, especially Ayurveda, in the realm of development? Has it contributed to it? Are there any serious publications in these lines with significant findings? That's my question.
Can I answer it now or later? Oh, can I go right away?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah. I think from 1980s onwards, there have been discussions about the role of state, society, and medicines. Interestingly, there are a few courses also run in Delhi University, and also I think in Varanasi, Banaras Hindu University also. There are a few ideas of these discussions have initiated. But if you look at one very serious publication is actually started in 2009, Professor Sujata, where I also have contributed a write-up, which talks about medical pluralism in contemporary India.
She's from JNU. No?
Yeah, it's actually from JNU. Obviously, there are many more articles written earlier from the 1980s onwards. Madhulika Banerjee's thesis in the political science of Delhi University, she has actually talked about, I didn't touch upon that part at all because it's a huge area to really deal with what kind of commodification that we see. She actually, the one, Madhulika has been interestingly talking about the pharmaceutical episteme, where how the commodification of Ayurveda has been created a kind of, idea that Ayurveda is growing. So is it actually synonymous? The commodification of Ayurveda is actually synonymous with the development of Ayurveda in public health. These kind of questions, very interesting questions have been raised by Madhulika. She called it, there is a pharmaceutical episteme, in this case. Pharmaceutical episteme in the sense that there is a pharmaceutical, there is a more movement towards a production process than than more of a basic research in Ayurveda. So whether this is actually doing any good to the Ayurveda or not. And it also talks about, she also published a book in 2009, another book which came at the same time, which is actually converted from her thesis, 1995. And there is also written a large number of writings by Professor Harish Narendas, Dr. Martin Bode. Some of you must be familiar with these kind of writings, I'm sure. And recently there have been, Bismay Party, and there is a huge number of articles which is coming in the 2010 onwards, or 2000 onwards, I should say. So the relation is actually, as I said, is a very complex one, which is seen in different writings. The idea is that whether how the state is actually been legitimizing Ayurvedic practice in different societies has been considered in various write-ups. Recently there are write-ups about what happens when there is a non-textual traditions like Ashtavaidya's traditions and all, or we can say folk medical systems, not the textual ones. How that has been incorporated in the state policies. What kind of hierarchy which exists in this idea of understanding of folk medicines in the entire Ayush system or entire indigenous medical system. What is its place? And whether there should be an involvement of a state at all in the development of folk medical systems, or we should have something like some kind of policies that many countries have been following. It's a tolerant policy that need to be followed. These discussions are coming up. I think it's actually brings this kind of triad is actually bringing into the important questions of science, technology, and society questions that we need to really teach students to see that how an alternative medical system is possible, or alternative knowledge system is possible. What is the politics of knowledge that is happening in the medical system, and what kind of transformations which happens nowadays when a traditional knowledge system confronts with Western medical system, not in the domestic market but in the international market, right? So these kind of issues have been quite reasonably dealt in various books. So it's quite a huge number of literature. So I would be happy to share some of the literature if someone is interested.
Thank you.
Can move to the next question. Yes, Somit sir, please.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great insight, Harilalji. So I was kind of listening through, and you mentioned about a very important point of, when we last had such a large scale pandemic and this infection disease, and that was a right opportunity also for Ayurveda community to come up and reclaim a new glory. And we are at the same inflection point now. But the kind of animal spirits we have, still we retain. But the issue is the state and regulation, where we have seen that how state has blatantly kind of crushed a proper even care which could be legitimate freedom of patient to decide for practicing because of this epidemic act. So how do you see this dichotomy, and how do we handle this balancing? Primarily it may not have been the revenues and economics behind the whole thing. It's also scientific pursuit when you are not allowed to even pursue a scientific query. So how do you kind of think about this dilemma which in Ayurveda communities are at this point?
I think it's a very, very, very relevant point. I mean, in fact, I have been discussing with Dr. Unikrishnan and some of the other peers who have been very interestingly talking about the possibility of Ayurveda's role during the pandemic, and what could be the role that state can actually give. But I think one of the right things that Dr. Shailaja Chandra has done, I mean, that's an interesting work, I should say. When she was the Ayush director, she actually has looked into, what is the status quo of Ayurveda in terms of its research, in terms of its policy status and all. I think she actually has pointed out that we need to really focus much more because, always we see that a state has an approach which is always a cost-benefit approach. How the state is actually dealing with different medical systems is actually been changing quite a lot of, in different times. If you see in the post freedom time, I mean, it's especially in 1950s and 60s, you see the number of task forces which has been created for development of Ayurveda, to understand the development of Ayurveda. And they had many recommendations in terms of integration, in terms of basic research, and how many of these recommendations have taken seriously by the later governments is something that we need to really see, right? And the state has not been really quite, even though we had, there was a department earlier, now there is a ministry. I don't know how far we are actually being focused in terms of raising Ayurveda to the mainstream. We had a lot of policy initiatives, mainstreaming Ayurveda, revitalizing local health traditions, but how far we are able to execute this in terms of not only policy aspects, but how far we are able to understand which are the focal areas that we need to give thrust upon. For example, the basic research in Ayurveda, the basic medicine plant research, as Shailaja has been pointing out, there is a huge number of policies that's been initiated by various times by the ministry and in collaboration with the private community. But most of them really lacked any kind of follow-up, right? So why actually we are not having this kind of follow-up? What is actually we are aiming by when we say that we need to promote integrative platforms? Of course, there is an admirable number of initiatives which is coming from AVPF and many other. I also see that the initiatives which is coming from FRLHT and a number of communities, but we need to really coordinate these kind of initiatives to streamline the research, and I think we need to really based on outcome research, evidence-based research. We need to really think about this possibility much more evidently now. I was actually writing about a proposal for looking at the possibility of Ayurveda and its interaction in the European community. You see that the role of Ayurveda that has been playing in Germany in Italy, even in Switzerland. Switzerland actually has started courses in some of the medical schools on Ayurveda. And you see that in the USA also, you see a number of institutions that started this. And a lot of integrative research has been started coming up, right? So we need to really streamline this kind of thoughts to probably push the government to think about how far actually we can mainstream Ayurveda or use Ayurveda in terms of difficult times like infectious diseases. Even though we have examples of IU64 and all, we are actually been, I mean, I don't know how far, Ayurvedic community has been vigilant about bringing something new during this time. Whatever I talked about during the cholera time, they have introduced a new drug. And I mean, this is, I think, a very interesting innovation which came up at that time. So we need to really think hard to how we can actually, I don't think that Ayurveda can deal with everything. I mean, but wherever we are actually competent enough to deal with, or whatever areas that we can focus on, Ayurveda need to focus on. And I'm sure that we will be able to pressurize the political system, the state, to really think about, contributing to Ayurveda's development. I think we have some kind of move in the right direction, but I see there is a, some of the state governments are not really willing to do that. And maybe I'm not sure what kind of approach, what kind of scientific approach that, which go along with the political kind of connotations that these state governments have. But at the same time, I think that we need to really focus on some of the areas where we can actually contribute more. And, the community, all the stakeholders of the Ayurvedic community has to really come together. And it's very difficult to, point out number 1, 2, 3 like this, but, it's always good to visualize there is a possibility of when I always say that there is a local innovation and production system which works together, which brings together all the Ayurvedic communities in the context of the international politics that unfolds today. There you see that the international organizations like WHO, UN, and WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, they have been striving to understand the reasonable evidence-based cases from different countries to really promote these kind of medicines in different countries. So I think in that case, Ayurveda also obviously has a role. And Ayurveda has really started that, and we have to really find a way through it.
Just a follow-up to that question. See, what happens is generally when we like we talk about economic and commoditization, sorry for that pronunciation, when we commoditize what you say, like to make money out of a commodity. Or so when we talk about in Ayurveda, there is always a dilemma as an Ayurveda scholar, is whether we should economically kind of work towards product, where we know that service, it's not just the medicine which works, but what works is the thought process. So when you are commercializing a product and a thought process, it is always a dilemma, because we know that one product, like for example, the IU64, maybe not one-stop solution for COVID case, and we have come across a lot of criticism on that front. So how do you, kind of an economist, try to understand this dilemma where you are creating one product, but it is not the answer to the question which we are trying to answer, but one of them. So, and you have a service to also commercialize, which on the other hand, which can be a more comprehensive approach. So what would be your, thoughts over this?
Definitely. I mean, I think probably when I first started really looking at the Ayurvedic production process, I understand the inherent paradoxicity here, where Ayurveda is more of a Prakriti-based medicine and very body constitution-based medicine, and how can we actually go for a large level of pharmaceuticalization? But at the same time, so I mean, this debate is quite old, and I'm not sure how actually. I mean, there is always a two opinion about this. So how far we are able to, like, simply looking at the strategy of Himalaya, Himalaya Drug Company in India. You see that the number of research that they have been bringing out, the number of products that they have been bringing out, that really fetch them a market. And obviously, you can also cite the corporatization that is happening in Ayurveda nowadays by bringing, large number of biomedical producers also been entering into Ayurveda. You see the investment from various branded drug manufacturers into Ayurveda, and not to mention any of them separately, but there are a large number of them. And the Dabur, Patanjali. So these kind of production process, I think the production is very important because just like China did, what they have done is actually mainstream the production process first, then they actually try to promote more of research, more of integrative research to say that how this really efficiently work and for different diseases and how this efficiently manage the various conditions of illness. So whether Ayurveda, I think, has that possibility to get the recognition at the beginning through the production process, probably then move into more of a basic research. I think this dilemma will continue to remain, but at the same time, I think we will be able to systematically move towards a much better standardized procedure. There should be a possibility of discussion in a particular platform, the evidence-based medicine kind of platform. I think that has been really understood by various international communities now. That's why we have seen that more number of collaborative research. So even though this dilemma at the production side is there always, I think this is also relevant along with, so when I say commoditization, what I meant to say is that it's not a negative term, I should say, but when you say commoditization, of course it's negative, but I use it in the sense that you should not really confused just by saying that having more number of products is actually the growth of Ayurveda, right? You also need to, as you rightly pointed out, we need to really think about a more therapeutical advancement in the case of Ayurveda. And this is a high time that the state and the society need to really think about this this issue. So obviously there is a conflict, but I hope that will be resolved. I think, but largely there is another issue of politicization within the larger structure of pharmaceuticals. That is quite evident, not only in the pharmaceuticals, but in the mainstream public health. That is something which is really worrying for me, which is quite evident in Kerala, in many other states, that in the name of a few people, how the system itself has been blamed because of various reasons, and this has been quite evident in the recent times, right? So we need to really stay away from these kind of issues, and we need to focus on how we can actually mainstream this unique system of medicine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Harilal, thanks a lot for the journey. I think it's a relevant thing, the journey from the family kitchen to the organized or the modern kitchen of Ayurveda transformation. I think it's a good journey. You lead us in a proper level. So I have a question regarding or a doubt. See, actually, in the British colonial time, actually Ayurveda sustained through the Paramparya Vaidyas or the family Vaidya concept, because they protected Ayurveda. Actually, the family Vaidyas or the Paramparya Vaidyas actually protected Ayurveda and sustained Ayurveda. I think so. So by this journey, I think from the family kitchen to the modernized kitchen, a type of industrialization or commercialization or institutionalization is happened. Actually, that's happened. And I strongly feel that in this journey of this transformation, the actual core of Ayurveda, which is I previously told that the strength which protected Ayurveda is damaged. I think so. Is it? Did you done any study in that area, that the family medicine or the quality of the Paramparya medicine is changed or damaged or something is happened? So whether this is came to your vision or your area of research?
Dr. Shaju, thank you. This is also an important point. Of course, while I was doing my thesis, this is one of the concerns that I really thought about. Because when I use the term commoditization, this is actually, if you look at that commoditization, the Marxian term, you see that there is actually a marginalization process which is happening along with it. You know, the marginalization, as you rightly point out, is happened in the case of traditional Vaidyas who are actually not ready to come into the mainstream pharmaceutical change. So how they have survived is a big question. Actually, we have I have not done a study on that, but that remains as a very important question. You see that why one simple thing, that when I was doing my thesis in 2010, there were around 900 Ayurvedic firms in the sense that very small dispensaries. But if you look at the data now, there is around 600 or something. I mean, 600 or 650. So you see that you know, there are few. I mean, if you look at the Kerala Ayurvedic market, obviously I can see there is a few core production units, which is around 10 or 12, who is actually contributing to. I have done a study on the market share of different companies in Ayurveda. You see that you know, there are a few companies around. I mean, the companies around 8 or 9 companies contributing to around 80 to 85% of the total market, while the all other 600 or 650 units together contributes to the 5 to 10%, which is left out. Okay, so some of these would be traditional Vaidyas-led dispensaries. Some of them are actually not producing any medicines, but only actually offering, even though their registration is in the name of production. I mean, I'm not sure. We have to really look into that, because for a production to be listed as a company, you need to have at least 10 laborers in the company. But some of them are not really having any kind of production. They are actually been suffering quite a lot. But I sincerely think that even in Kerala now, we have a niche market for traditional Ayurvedic practitioners at some point. I mean, the question of their legitimizing or mainstreaming them into the mainstream Ayurvedic practice is a big question. I mean, the state is actually, I think 2008 state has actually tried to do something, but then it's actually been shelved. And it's a high time that we need to have a proper policy of bringing these traditional Ayurvedic practitioners who is otherwise not institutionally trained Ayurvedic physicians into the mainstream and use their contributions to really into the public health criteria. But I see that in the process of, I mean, in Kerala, the things are different, I should say. Kerala, I would say that even now that, you know, this is mostly kind of a very spread out in a sense, where it's mostly not, I mean, if you look at the other states, you see that Ayurvedic industry has transformed quite a lot. They have moved from a medicine-oriented production to more of a food supplement or nutraceutical kind of production process. While still most of our dispensaries and pharmacies have been kind of still dealing with, you know, classical drugs. We make a division between classical drugs and proprietary drugs and then patented medicines, right? When I talk about Ayurvedic industry, we use a term here, we call it reformulation regime, where most of the Ayurvedic production, what is happening now, is actually surviving through the reformulation regime. They usually take the classical formula, then actually change the combinations, then you actually get a branded, you know, tag attached to it, and then you get the approval from the drug controller and then marketize it. You get the marketing approval. It's not really a patented product, which doesn't go through the real patented, you know, procedures. Otherwise, the usual pharmaceutical drugs is going through in terms of its standardization process and other. But there are obviously there's some kind of toxicity test and you know, basic research has been done in some of the drugs, but generally you see that. I mean, I think it's relevant. I'm not ridiculing it. It's quite relevant. We say that reformulation regime is the actual innovations that is happening in Ayurveda. So we don't see large level of technological innovation happening in Pfizer or other big companies. But there is a kind of innovation. What is happening in Ayurvedic industries, basically reformulative innovations, which actually fetch a huge market for Ayurveda. I mean, that's why when you take a product and look at it, you'll see that Ayurveda proprietary medicine, right? It's written, and then there is a source written to it. And the approval for these kind of drugs and patent drugs is completely different. There's a sea difference in that. Okay, so Ayurveda market is dominated by these particular drugs, and many companies are actually quite successful in it. But if you look at Kerala's case, there are huge. I mean, even now the huge sale of Ayurveda drugs is mostly concentrated on the medicine-based kind of drugs, the decoctions and the classical, we call it classical Shastric drugs. And there is, of course, a kind of portion of, I mean, around 30 to 35% is actually the proprietary medicines, but in other states, that has a huge component. So even though in Kerala, this is the case, as you rightly said, the small producers of decoctions and small manufacturer decoctions really remain marginalized, and most of their clinics have been shut down in the recent past. So I mean, there was some effort which has been done by Kerala state and the private initiatives through Care Keralam sometime back. And I actually looked upon it as a very interesting cluster initiative in Thrissur. But we also see that now this is not working quite effectively at the recent past. I don't want to call it as a failed model, but I was actually looking at it, how small Ayurvedic physicians can actually come and use the mechanization and advice process of Care Keralam and then try to market their own products in the market. But somehow, because of various management issues and there are a number of issues. I have written a paper about that itself. So there is a huge, I mean, there is a number of reasons why it's not working quite properly now. But as you said, it's a relevant issue. So we need to have some kind of policy initiative where we can actually incorporate and mainstream them. I don't have a clear policy direction. It's very difficult to give a clear policy direction in this sense, but we need to have this is a high time that we need to really think about them. But when I look through the historical documents, I see that some of these people who are actually traditional physicians who are forced to even move into sale of medicines and herbal collectors, herb collectors. So this is the change of roles when there is a commercialization comes into being. And this is a pity to say that some sections are really marginalized in the process of production. That's why Madhulika Banerjee has called it as a pharmaceutical episteme. This is actually the bubble that has been created where a large section has been left out.
I think one of your slide, I read that when the demand increases, some controls and controls will be there. Please, once please.
Regulative.
Regulative controls will be there. Actually, you told that previously the companies or the Ayurvedic manufacturing units in Kerala was approximately 1,000 units. Now it came down to approximately 600. This happens because once the GMP, good manufacturing practice, planned and implemented in Kerala. So many small units cannot survive. That's happened in that area. Okay. Now another question I have to ask is that what is the prospects of Ayurveda comparing with the herbal medicine? Whether Ayurveda have to change the shape to fit into the global market through the herbal medicine? Do you think?
I think already that is happening to an extent. I mean, if you look at the trade data, I happen to look at the trade data. I have seen that what is actually going through in the name of Ayurvedic medicines, they are not really Ayurvedic medicines, most of them, but it's actually the nutritional products, especially. So it's not basically Ayurvedic medicines per se that has been exported in the name of Ayurveda, but it's basically food supplements and other products. And also some of the herbal drugs are also called Ayurvedic categories. So this is actually happening. This is not something which is we are looking forward to in the future, but this is happening. That's a reality. So I think that herbal research is quite advanced in the world. So I think the contribution of Ayurveda in this process, I don't know whether Ayurveda need to be when I actually look at the market, obviously it's very difficult to delineate between the Ayurvedic products and the herbal products. It's quite mixed up in many cases. But we need to really think about a proper methodology where we can actually do the standardization process in an effective way, which we will make an appeal to how we actually make an appeal to the international community that the efficacy of Ayurveda is quite relevant. Even though Ayurveda has accepted as a system to win in the to probably integrate into the world public health system, just like what China has done, we need to really think about the various strategies. I'm not saying that we need to really go for reverse engineering or things that China has been adopting. But at the same time, we need to really stick to our core and then develop the various new methodologies by which we can actually integrate research, especially to promote Ayurveda. But integration with herbal medicine is actually happening. It's already there. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
I think it is already time now, quite. But if time permits, yes, we can have some questions. And I have a question which I'm not able to withhold. It's not directly to the subject, but I'm very curious to know, like, how did you get interested into Ayurveda, being an economist?
Yeah, I did my research in Center for Development Studies in Trivandrum, which is a kind of out campus of JNU. I've been discussing with probably some of my colleagues and Professor Thomas Isaac also about the possibilities of research in especially Ayurvedic tourism in the beginning. Then I tried to read the literature, and the suggestions came from these people are also saying that there's a huge gray area, that Ayurvedic commercialization, that probably we are good at it. We don't know yet what is the status quo of this particular industry. So then I started looking into, what is the literature on this? There are very few people who are actually started writing about this, and probably except a few, none of them were actually from India, and most of the literature is coming from outside. So having such an interesting topic here, I thought of looking at it from an industrial perspective and then started reading it. But then I understood that there are quite a lot of attached areas which is relevant and need to be looked at, including the standardization issues, the medicinal plants, raw material issues, the issues of intellectual property rights and patenting in indigenous medicines, and the hierarchical structure of folk medicines, textual traditions, and the oral traditions, and the politics of knowledge within that. So these number of areas are quite really interesting. So then I started reading, and then started writing it. And also my research is funded by the Indian Council for Social Science Research. And I happen to really interact with some of the universities across the world, like Heidelberg University, for example, and CNRS Paris, the National Research Agency of Paris. So they all found that this is something which is relevant from an less and medium developed countries point of view, to see that how not only from an economics point of view, but obviously there is an interdisciplinary perspective which is relevant to look at Asian medicines and its contribution to the public health, what kind of policy legitimation that we need to really pursue in terms of, because they have been groping around with, the various strands of ideas of dealing with how to regulate these systems and all, number of issues in this. So I thought this is a very, very interesting area to, I'm also always ask the young minds to really come into this area and do more research, because there is no dearth of research. There is no dearth of areas for research in this particular area. So I think we need to have more interdisciplinary research, not only from an epistemological point of view, not from a clinical point of view, but also from a social science point of view or a public policy point of view, how Ayurveda could be incorporated more relevantly into the mainstream public health. I had occasions and discussion with Professor Dr. Krishna Kumar some time back when I was actually in Kerala for a discussion. We had a white paper discussion on Ayurveda in 2016, where we actually brought out the various issues in Ayurvedic industry to the state of Kerala, where the health secretary was also present, and most of the manufacturers of Kerala was also present. We introduced some points that for consideration. I mean, as usually, there is not much follow-up. I think that's a real problem that we really face in Ayurvedic sector, even from the Ayush department or from many other relevant agencies. We don't really, somehow there is a coordinated kind of effort is missing in this area. I think I hope that there will be more voluntary organizations will come up dealing with this, taking up these issues. We have to defend the blames against Ayurveda and other indigenous systems. We should collectively defend and progress the system at some point of time. And I think this is high time that we should do that. So there should be people who will be taking initiative, I hope.
I can relate to it very much. I can just share one small information, like we all talk about the plants and the secondary metabolites of the plants that comes into the Ayurvedic medicine, but somehow we forget that there's a lot of contributions from the microorganisms and fermented products. Any product in Ayurveda, the moment we see that it is kept overnight, or there's a fermentation involved. So the mother culture of that is a lot of economical potential beyond Ayurveda using these microbes and aspects. Being a microbiologist, I keep exploring this aspect, and that's why I thought I'll put this question to you. Any more questions from the participants? Yeah, Dr. Jishnu, yes, please.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. Hi. So you are talking about the support which was given by the Travancore during the ancient time, that support given by the Travancore government to the Ayurveda participants. So I'm also an alumni of government at the College Trivandrum. So when we discuss about a public health system, as a public health system, when we talk about Ayurveda, we always know that in a democratic system, public demand always plays a major role in allotting the fund for a system. So when I was in Trivandrum also, when we are always in, we used to go to the secretariat and the office of health minister as well. So there what we see is there will be local representatives from the local self-governments who are demanding more infrastructure development in their respective panchayats. That's if 10 people come for.
Jishnu, your microphone is off. It's muted. Yeah. Now it's okay. Yeah, now it's okay.
That may be as a medical officer post or some other infrastructure development. There will be a maximum 2 or 3 persons who will be demanding infrastructure development in the Ayurveda system or the Ayush system. So there always that shows the public demand as a system. So when we talk about the funding and all, This thing always matters, right? So when
Jishnu, again it is muted.
it is from the ground level or from the administrative level, from the top to bottom or from the lower to the top? That's my question.
I mean, that's very relevant. I mean, this is a problem. So yeah, I actually looked into some of those data. You see that the funding for Ayurveda is kind of quite less. If you look at the 11th plan period and 12th plan period, it's been increasing, but not in a real significant level. And whatever it has been funded, we need to see that where that has been circulated. Okay. For example, if you look at the standardization, they spend a lot of money for salaries and wages. They spend a lot of money, but how far we are actually spending for research, it's quite less. I mean, even if you take the private Ayurvedic manufacturing firms, their expenditure is probably around 2% of their total income. Okay, 2 to 3%. While in the real in the other pharmaceutical sector, it is probably around 20 to 30%. So the expenditure on R&D is quite less. While some of the Ayurvedic firms are actually spending quite a lot of money for advertisements. Okay, and that's a different case. But anyway, I agree with you that even the public funding towards Ayurvedic research is quite less. And it is also, we need to understand that, as you said rightly, we need to really focus on wherever the demand is coming from, the money need to be kind of diverted to that area, which I could really find when I'm doing research in Himachal Pradesh, in especially in the Ladakh region. I found that there is a huge demand for Tibetan medicine. The people are actually queuing up in the Tibetan medical centers. When I looked at the data, I have seen that the last level of funding is actually going for Unani. Okay, so you see that there is a mismatch between and some of my co-research is also has been pointing out this problem, whether this funding is actually been diverted to the area which a system which has a demand for it. So I think the same problem is here, whether who is actually making the decisions of funding, and whether you are able to convey the right kind of demand to the top authorities to really get the funding for. And also I'm thinking about, whether we are actually been utilizing this funding which is given by Ayush, whether are we really, I have to really look at the data to see that how many research projects have been funded under the Ayush ministry and also by the other institutions related to Ayush, and how far this, any kind of backup has been done in terms of, the results of this research and all. And also the funding infrastructure. Kerala is actually, probably we cannot blame it. I mean, Kerala is quite good in terms of its infrastructure level. If you, Ayurveda is very much comparable to biomedicine. But at the same time, there are issues which has been pointed out during the NRHM time in terms of co-location of these medical systems, the new program that has been initiated, how far the Ayurveda has been effectively utilized in the key roles of service delivery. Those kind of things are questionable, whether the Ayush doctors has been used at the right point or whether they have only used as in the emergency department. I mean, these kind of questions have come up. These kind of issues have come up. So as you said, it's quite relevant. The funding itself per se is very less. And whatever funding is coming through is actually reaching the right places is a big question. And whatever money has been allotted to such sectors, are we really utilizing it? That's also a big question. So I think we need to really be concerned about all these things. That's correct.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the Ayurveda Pharmacy Coimbatore Limited and the 113th birthday celebrations of PV Rama Varier, I thank all the participants at the fest and in the Zoom and Facebook who have joined today. And I also thank Dr. Harilal Madhavan, who have it was really it's not just a formal thanks. It was really inspiring to listen from a different perspective, and definitely offline we would connect and would explore more possibilities, what is mutually possible. Also, being a virtual program, like a small token of our love would be dispatched to you from our managing director's office. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a really privilege and pleasure for me. Thank you so much for all.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Somebody